live in an age of instant information. So isn't it strange that things have been hidden away from us? Governments think we need to gain their trust, but it's the other way around. Just take a look. Nothing tells us more than raw data does. So it's important, it's all available to us. Plus, put up for debate and looked at by the public's gaze. Because there's a lot more to be...
Hello, and welcome to the Tech Dirt Podcast. I'm Mike Masnick. I doubt it will surprise many of you that when I was a kid, I was one of those nerdy kids with the calculator wristwatch. I went through a bunch of them, actually, and people are already laughing at me. And I always loved getting a new calculator wristwatch when the old one broke. But to be honest, however, I actually don't recall ever actually using the calculator for calculating purposes on the watch. I think I just liked having it. As I got older, I switched over to regular digital watches, and then somewhere in the early 2000s, I remember I picked up an amazing watch off of Woot, back in the early days of Woot, long before it became part of Amazon. That was a combination watch and MP3 player. And while the iPod had just been released and could carry a lot more songs, it was still kind of bulky to carry around. And this idea of not just carrying around some of my favorite songs, but doing so on my watch seemed like a really cool idea. And I used it for maybe a year before giving up on it, and everyone thought it was kind of weird. But soon after that came smartphones, and somewhere along the way, like many, many people, I totally stopped wearing a watch. There seemed to be no need to have a watch when you had a phone. And even though there were early attempts to create smarter watches, like Microsoft's infamous Spot watch, which I mocked mercilessly on TechDirt, you can actually go back and see those articles in which I talk about how stupid an idea a smartwatch is. But by the mid-2000s, it really seemed like the very concept of a wristwatch was on the way out entirely. And many people think that that statement is still true. And yet, in the last few years, there's been a resurgence of smartwatches, really starting with the Pebble on Kickstarter, followed by Samsung and then Google's attempt with Android Wear, and of course now Apple's entrance into the market as well with the Apple Watch. There are also a number of other players as well, but most of them are fairly marginal. And while I still see people mocking the idea of a smartwatch, I have to admit that I'm actually sold on the concept. Even though I hadn't worn a watch in nearly a decade and had mocked it, something about the Pebble really seemed compelling. And since I started using one, I've never gone back. After using the Pebble for just a few days, I realized how powerful smartwatches could be, in large part because they changed my relationship with my smartphone. In the past, I was always checking my phone, always worried about missing important things. However, with smartwatches, my phone stays in my pocket, set to silent, and I only need to pull it out when I really need to do something with it. It is difficult to explain just how liberating this feeling is until you experience it, but the fact that notifications just appear on my wrist with a little buzz is actually tremendously powerful, and it somehow allows those notifications to come in a much more ambient fashion, because I can just glance down at my wrist and quickly judge whether it's important or not important. It actually allows me to better prioritize and is less likely to interrupt other things, as counterintuitive as that may sound. Previously, if there was a notification on my phone, I'd feel much more compelled to check it out, to open up the phone, to see what it's about, and to start messing around. But now with just a glance, I can quickly determine the importance and move on. Communicating by text via the watch is groundbreaking to me and much more conversational, though I sometimes forget that others don't do this, and I once freaked out some friends just by glancing at my watch and letting them know that another friend was about to join us, and they had no idea how I knew that. There are still many problems and limitations with today's smartwatches, which I'm sure we'll be discussing, but I wanted to do today's podcast by talking about the promise or not of things like smartwatches with people who might be a little bit more skeptical of their promise than I am. And so today we have Dennis Yang, our regular co-host, and back one more time, Carlo Longino, both of whom have played around with smartwatches but are less enthusiastic about it than I am. So, guys, I need you to pull me back from the abyss here. Am I the only crazy one who thinks that smartwatches are an incredible advancement?
I mean, I don't think you're the only one. I mean,
I recognize not the only one, but is it a small niche market of crazy people?
In our very unscientific and horrible sample size here, like I wear.
What are you talking about?
We have 3 people.
It's 50% bigger than 2.
We have 1 person here wearing a smartwatch. Right?
Yeah.
I wear a old-fashioned mechanical automatic winding watch, and I don't see a watch.
I use a sundial. No, I don't wear a watch.
So right now you have 1/3 of the market. So, I mean, I think that the problem I have with smartwatches right now is, what the thing that you mentioned before, where you're saying you at a glance you can kind of take a look at your notifications, and I think that it really comes to like there's a large part about kind of being present and what all these devices have done to our social fabric of being physically together. And, for me, like, I've hung out with you, Mike, and I've noticed you glancing down at your watch, and there's something, we
know what you're up to.
We know what you're up to, but that if you're hanging out with me and I look at my watch also tells me something that, it tells me what time it is. And that we have been, at least, we've been trained for years.
There's a social
yes
component to that, which
that like we're very, very good at noticing things. So when you do that, it feels like you're in a hurry. Like I'm like, do you have to go somewhere, right? Like, and I think that maybe it's basically we need to retrain.
Are we done yet?
Like
done yet?
Like, do you have to? We're hanging out. Why you keep looking at your watch, right? Like, it just makes it.
Sorry,
it makes it
now I feel bad.
I'm just saying. Like,
I didn't realize this was going to turn into a discussion on how I treat my friends.
Well, I think what's interesting about what you said, Mike, is that what you find so fascinating and compelling about smartwatches is part of what I find so underwhelming.
Yeah.
Insofar as, I don't think it's that I'm so down on smartphones. I mean, I don't think it's this dichotomy of either you're all in or you're all out. I think one of the things that we have going right now, not just with smartwatches, but with all of our devices, is we have so many screens for notifications.
Sure. Yeah.
And I sort of feel like the last thing that I need is just another screen for notifications. And so I think if we think back to some of the earlier smartwatches that you weren't so hot on, things like Spot, or do you remember the Swatch with the built-in pager?
That's right. I'd forgotten, but thank you for dredging up that memory.
Those at least attempted to bring in some new functionality. And so I think sort of like we were talking about last week with VR, is we're still in early days and people are kind of figuring out what else can be done with these. Because when you think about the smartwatch, it really is more than just a screen for notifications in many cases. I mean, you've got increasingly complex sensors in them, whether it's fitness-based, which again I think is something that's fairly obvious, I guess, in a sense. But just some of the motion detectors, the multi-axis motion detectors, can do some interesting things with.
Like Apple Watch does like heart rate now, right? So
and I think some of the Android Wear ones do it as well.
Yeah,
mine does heart rate.
Samsung one that I've got in my hand here has the optical.
Oh yeah,
this one
optical.
Because I have
heart rate thing.
Yeah, the Moto one has it too, and
and so I mean, on some level, if you're really into tracking your fitness information, these offer a lot more functionality than a lot of the more sort of step counter based ones. Well, and so I think it's just, again, it's getting the tools in the hands of developers and letting them figure out what can be done with these things.
Well, the one thing I'm going to push back a little bit on that, because actually the thing that I find so interesting about it is less that aspect to it and more actually the notification stuff. And I know that like so many people react this way and they're just like, I don't want more notifications. I don't want my wrist buzzing, right? But for me, like actually the smartwatch is what made me find notifications much more powerful and much more useful. And I think honestly, before I had originally the Pebble, you know, I almost never would like check the notifications specifically on my phone. Like, you know, there were things that I knew I had to check, whether it's email or text messaging or whatever. But once I had it on my wrist and it was sort of separated from the phone, the notifications actually became much more powerful. And to me, it was actually just the fact that it was this sort of notification device on my wrist. That was the killer app, more so than the apps. And I keep seeing all these attempts to sort of build apps and build more features into the watches. And maybe I'm, you know, again, maybe I'm out there and I'm the exception, not the rule.
Well,
but it was actually
I don't
the
think it
notifications
has to
that
be
were
one answer. And I think too, that sort of what you're talking about with the notifications isn't quite as simplistic as I'm portraying it just as another screen. I think it's offering a way to make notifications better and more useful.
Yeah,
I mean, I would offer another example that's different but slightly similar. This Samsung phone that I have. I hate to keep dropping Samsung. It just happens to be what I'm carrying. But you know, it's got a multicolor notification LED, which you can make it light up different colors for different applications. So if I get a WhatsApp message versus an email versus a text, without turning the screen on, I can just see that light blink a certain color and know what it is. And so I think things like that, that then can be implemented on the watch, whether it's through different vibration patterns, some things like that.
Well,
can be.
And how much?
Can be
I was
really
going to
interesting.
ask you, Mike, like how much work did you do to kind of curate the different types of notifications that you receive?
Not that much, but actually that's the one thing that I would like, which is going back to the comments that both of you just made, which is like more control over the notifications. Right now, it's not good enough,
right?
You know, and that's where like for example, like as I'm sitting here, like honestly, just in the 10 minutes that we've been recording this podcast, my wrist has buzzed about 3 or 4 times. Right?
I know.
Anything
interesting.
And I haven't looked at it. I've resisted. Give me a break here.
And we can tell you're trying
you're
very, very hard.
But
go ahead, look at it.
It's cool, Mike.
It's okay.
Let's take 10 seconds and let Mike look at it.
but what would be handy is if I did have more control in terms of like, so if my wife is sending me a text message, I would like it to buzz in a certain way so that I know like, oh, this is important, right? In theory, right?
Well, because there's two things, right? There's urgency and there's importance,
right? Sure.
And those are treated exactly the same in our current notification infrastructure,
right? And like right now with this watch, for example, there are certain apps buzz in different ways, and I have no visibility into that, and I have no idea how to control it. I can basically turn off or turn on apps.
I'm surprised there's not a third-party app that's...
I've tried a few, and none of them really work.
Interesting.
So people are working on it.
People are working on it, and people are talking about it.
I mean, I know in the companion app for this Samsung one, you do the only granularity that you have in notifications is sort of per app.
Right. And that's the way it generally is, but it hasn't gotten down to the layer of, within those apps. So, if it's something really important, I want a certain kind of notification.
Yeah.
So that I could, so then it becomes much more useful. And then it also helps solve the problem of, of you thinking I'm bored, talking to you because I keep glancing at my watch because I know when it's an important notification and when it's not, and when I can just check it later.
Because that's like the problem right now is like at least I look at the notifications I have on my phone and it's like, every tweet from Mike comes up as a notification. Every email that gets sent to me, it's like, these are not exactly what I want to be notified. Like I'm imagining all this stuff happening on my wrist and it'd just be totally distracting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the one that I have, I turn everything off except messaging apps and phone calls, I think.
Right.
So email, I don't care about necessarily getting interrupted with every email.
Mike, do you have email turned on?
So this is actually interesting because so when I first got the Pebble, the first thing I did was turn off email because that was too much.
Noisy.
Except the thing that I discovered once I moved off of the Pebble and onto an Android watch. In between that time, the other thing I'd done, and this may be a podcast for another day also, is I had signed up for a service that filters my emails, which tries to judge which emails are actually important and which are not. And it is actually very, very good at that.
That's like a separate service.
That's a completely separate service. Has nothing to do with the watch, but that has to do with my email.
That's back to your point about the granularity.
To the granularity. And then because of that, and then I tried email again on the watch, and now because my actual inbox has really shrunk to the emails that do come in actually are important, I actually now do find it pretty valuable to have it on my watch because it actually helps me see, when those emails come in, they are generally important, and I can get at a very quick glance, like, oh, so-and-so is emailing me, and I can see the beginning of and I can actually read the whole email on my watch if I want to, and I could even reply that. I almost never do that.
Right.
But yeah, so once you get
How
that
do you reply? Is
granularity-
it by voice or?
You can, it's all by voice.
Yeah.
And I'm always a little sketched out by that because
I don't find that appealing.
yeah,
I think we've
Yeah.
talked about that in other scenarios in the past. Just
Yeah.
this sort of walking around. You know,
though I have found like the one thing I use the voice for is like to set reminders or to take very quick little notes. Setting reminders, in fact, where it's like if I need to remember to do something tomorrow morning or something, to just like say to my watch, like remind me at 6 a.m. take out garbage or whatever or something is actually super handy.
Right. And but I do that. I mean, I use Siri for that right now. So,
Sure. Yeah.
And I guess I
But
question the
there's still-
additional
there's
utility.
still- it's
of
hard
talking
to
to my wrist.
It's hard to explain. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just the way that mentally I do it. Just because
Yeah.
there's a different feeling to when the phone is in your pocket and you have to
Right.
pull it out. And there's something about that process of pulling it out. To me, at least, there's something about that process of pulling it out that is. And it sounds silly, and this sounds ridiculous as I'm saying. Like, why should pulling something out of my pocket feel like a barrier? Right?
I get it, and I think it's akin to when you're meeting someone for coffee and they take out their phone and they set it on the table, and they're like, boom, here it is, and it's like, whoa, okay, that's like what's going on, like there are these kind of barriers.
well,
that,
some of that
you
is
know,
with phones are getting so big, it's quite uncomfortable to sit with them in your pocket sometimes.
But
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to me because and I don't think I would have thought this before I had it and I was using it and,
Right.
and just found it so useful that I know that if I wasn't wearing the
Right.
watch right now, I would miss it. And like for me, honestly, like the phone itself, I use it much less. I have the sound off. I
Right.
even have the vibrate off. So it's
Really?
just everything goes through my wrist, and so the phone just sits there, and I don't pull it out nearly as often. I don't get sucked into the phone
Right,
nearly as
right.
often, and I actually find that really powerful and really, really useful.
I think that's interesting, and I think in terms of the Apple Watch, I think Apple Pay is an interesting one where,
Sure.
like I've been using my phone to pay for things at Walgreens and whatnot, and it is a little bit awkward, right?
This is another thing where I sort of feel like we're
You're over engineering.
I mean, I've always been skeptical of a lot of the phone-based payment things, just simply
Yeah.
because I feel like they're solving a problem that doesn't really exist. I mean, I don't feel like it's necessarily that much more convenient to
I like
plunk
left
out with
pocket
your
versus right
phone
pocket,
as
yeah.
opposed to just
Pulling out a credit
pulling
card.
your card out of your wallet is really not
Right. Well,
not
here's
difficult.
here's the problem that doesn't. So basically, if it truly solves the payment problem, and I can leave my credit cards at home, then it actually solves the problem. But
Yeah.
right now, where we are is like I have to carry everything still. I still have to carry my license. I still have to carry credit cards. But the world in which we can really ditch all that
Yeah.
stuff, ditch my house keys,
Yeah.
and have just one thing or have nothing, just have,
Have
the
just a watch.
Yeah, I guess.
You know what the security people refer to that as, Dennis?
What?
A single point of failure. But I mean, I'm kidding around. But at the same time, I do think there are
it's
things
valid.
that
Yeah.
say with payments, for instance, that
Right.
that the mobile payments can bring. So when I was in Chicago, for instance, being able to use Google Wallet on my phone to pay for the subway,
Yeah.
as opposed to being here in San Francisco, where you've got to go to
yeah.
the trouble of getting a Clipper card and
Yeah.
dealing with their fantastic system
Oh,
and trying to refill it and
Right.
and all of that. And so I think being able to do something like that with a watch would actually be pretty cool, where you just
Wave.
as long as the reader's on the correct side for your wrist, just sort of being able to
Yeah, and that'll be fixed.
that
I
on
think
there.
I was on a flight a few weeks ago, and my brother has an Apple Watch, and I used my phone to check in, and that was totally fine. But he had to like kind of contort himself around to the reader, and that's just because it's been designed for a certain way, a certain user interface.
Well, it's
and,
been designed to
Yeah.
read a flat piece of paper.
right. So to get his arm into the actual reader, he was kind of like, and people were like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I gotta." And then the next time we checked into a fight, he just took his phone out and did it that way.
Yeah.
'Cause-
I'm still so old fashioned that I'm so nervous about that. I still need the paper one.
Yeah, well, I actually screenshot the QR code just in case something happened. So, that's my little comfort.
Actually, one of the cooler things I've seen in a while was the Yoda phone, which is it's an Android phone with a regular display on one side and e-ink on the back.
Huh.
And so, for instance, if you're traveling, you can load the boarding pass onto
so
the
that
e-ink display. So then even if your phone dies,
Right, you still have that
still stays
stay.
there, or it just stays there the whole time. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I've got to load the application, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And you just flip your phone over and there it is.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
an aside.
Boarding the plane with like 20% battery life is terrifying. So,
Yeah, and then especially if you've got a connection. Oh, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, no, I mean it's interesting, but and then that gets to also, I mean, just even the difference between like e-ink and the screens, right? I mean, the Pebble watches are still e-ink watches right now.
Even the color one, or is
Yeah, the color one is color e-ink,
Yeah.
and I actually just got that, and I've been playing around with it.
and you haven't switched to it.
I haven't switched to it. I've gone.
Do you have two?
know,
You have two wrists though.
well, now that you've brought it up, I wasn't going to admit this.
And you could actually wear more than one watch on your wrist too.
I have actually for a period of time worn both the
You're wearing them right now, aren't you?
No, I'm not wearing. I don't even have it. Last week I was actually carrying around both of them. I had one in my bag and one on my wrist.
Maybe
'Cause
you
I'm trying
could
to-
make a belt. Of all this. Just put them end to end.
But I mean, I'm just sort of trying. I've been testing it, but honestly, and I'd used the original Pebble for a while,
Yeah.
and I liked it, and then I wasn't sure I was going to switch, and then the more I was using the Moto 360, I actually really liked that and the interface behind it, and then
What's that one you're wearing right now?
that's the Moto 360.
Yeah.
And so, but I was hoping, what I told a lot of people about the Pebble originally when I was wearing it was that what I really liked about it was that it made me understand the potential of these things, less so than I thought it had realized the potential of those things. And I think that was still true, and I still think that's true of the Moto 360. And I think that's why I then, when the new Pebble came out, I got that one also.
Yeah.
Because I was hoping that it would have gotten closer to actually realizing the promise of these things. And after using it for, a week and a half or so, I'm not quite sure it's there yet either. And I'm not sure that the advances with the Pebble are enough to make it outweigh what I already have with the Moto.
I think it's interesting too, though, to see that these devices, they're not all created equal.
Sure.
And I mean that in a positive way.
Yeah.
Insofar as maybe if your main interest is notifications,
Yeah.
the Pebble is the right choice for you. It may. I'm just
Yeah,
this
right.
is-
For
I don't know
example,
sure.
yeah.
But then this Samsung one that I've got here, for instance, has a GSM radio built into it. It has a SIM card. So you're able. I
So
think
it's basically a mini phone.
essentially it's a mini phone.
Right.
And I think the intent of the design is that you can forward calls from your phone, your
So
smartphone,
can you leave your phone
to
at
the watch.
home?
So sort of like you were saying before,
Yeah.
I think you could say you go out for a run or something.
Yeah.
You've still got access to all
Right.
of your regular notifications perhaps, and your phone calls and everything, but you're not having to carry your phone around.
Right.
So
And that's actually really interesting, but in a different way.
yeah. And I think part of the problem with that is then, of course, finding an operator that will sell you a subscription for it. But as Mike has pointed out a few times, that's probably another topic for another podcast. My point is just that I think there are going to be lots of different types of these devices catering to a lot of different kinds of use cases, and I think I just haven't found the right device or the right use case for myself just yet. But I think I can see where those are. For instance, I was in Berlin earlier this year and moderating a panel about smartwatches, and we had the founder of Komoot, which is a German company that's basically an online directory of outdoor activities. And so you could sort of think of it as almost as a, ways for hiking or kayaking or biking or whatever. And so, of course, they've come out with, with a smartwatch app, for instance, if you're biking down a trail and it sends you the trail directions on your bike, because obviously that's better than having to pull out the smartwatch. So I think there are things like that really make sense. There was another woman on the panel from I can't remember the name of the application, but it tracks women's ovulation cycles. And so being able to send that sort of notification to a smartwatch, which is even more intimate and private than a phone, makes a lot of sense.
Potentially. Right. I mean, and this is honestly like one of the weird things, I'll let you finish, but like one of the weird things about the watch is that there is sometimes where I'm just like, it is possible for people to more easily see the watch sometimes if I don't have like a cuff covering it up or something.
Sure.
And so I do sometimes worry about that, where I get notifications like people next to me are like, what's that message?
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is just sort of, like you were talking about your calculator watches earlier and digital watches, and Dennis was talking about his mechanical sort of old school. Yeah. Quote unquote.
It does an okay job of telling. It's right now. I'm looking at the watch and it's exactly 2 minutes slow. So it doesn't do a great job at telling
the time, which is
but it's pretty.
Intended.
But we all. When was the last time you were one, you were wearing a watch, and two, you sat next to someone who had the exact same watch on that you did. We choose different things for different reasons, whether it's fashion or functionality or whatever the case may be. And I think smartwatches are going to evolve like that too. And some of it will be software, but a lot of it will still be the actual hardware and design.
Yeah, sure. And that's what especially with the Apple Watch. Certainly, plenty of people have been arguing that it's really a fashion play,
and I think that's right. I mean, it's a fashion play on multiple levels.
Absolutely.
But I when thinking about this stuff, it makes me think back to when Mike and I first met. Almost 15 years ago, writing for this website called thefeature.com that Nokia had started as a way to just explore the future of mobile technology. And for an article for that, I interviewed a guy named Frank Nuovo, who at the time was Nokia's chief designer. And it was just after, I think, Minority Report movie had come out. And he had designed all of the
interface
devices and everything in that movie. And if I recall correctly, Tom Cruise had like a pocket watch sort of thing that was a smartwatch. And as I interviewed this guy, he was saying, I think really what's going to happen is as devices evolve, we weren't even necessarily talking particularly about smartwatches. I don't think that had entered the consciousness just yet. But he was saying, I think that he thought things would evolve to become more sort of like timepieces and more not these sort of disposable throwaway electronic devices, but something with a bit more heft and kind of attachment. We'd have more attachment to them, and they would be
have
more
an heirloom electronic device.
In a sense. And so, I think perhaps there's still some scope for that. I mean, particularly when you look to something like a watch that people typically in the past would buy and hold on to for some time, and and you have some that people hold on to for generations.
But
obviously there's a host of issues, in terms of electronics and technology. But I think his underlying point about this evolving as a fashion piece, basically, I think is still valid.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that wrist watches evolved from pocket watches, right? So essentially, like that's kind of what's happening right now, right? Like your smartwatch is evolving from your pocket device, which is your smartphone, right? So, but in a very different way.
Yeah. It's not replacing it like
it's not replacing it like a wristwatch replaced a pocket.
And there is the sort of possibility too that the wristwatch is a temporary, the smartwatch wristwatch form factor is a temporary thing as well. I mean, you could get to the point. Obviously, there's things like Google Glass, which is
when we're all living in our virtual reality worlds,
or living in the virtual reality worlds, or have things injected directly into contact lenses in your eyes or something, or directly into your brain or whatever. Who knows what it might be? But at least for me, just the watch form factor has actually been much more powerful than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of cases where it really does make a lot of sense too. I mean, I think I was talking to someone from Sony, and they were saying they had been doing a project with Scania, the like big truck maker.
Oh, right. Okay.
Based in Sweden, where they were integrating certain things within the truck to Sony phones and Sony smartwatches. So, for instance, in that case, if you've got a guy driving a semi down the road and you need to send him a message, you don't want to necessarily send a text or make a phone call.
Yeah.
But if he can just get an alert on a smartwatch that says, pull over and, check your messaging app, or pull over for new instructions or something like that, or, buzz, your truck is overheating. I think there are things like that make a lot of sense too.
Yeah, and I have to admit, actually, driving is a scenario that's been really interesting with the smartwatch, which is that, I don't, I won't like pick up my phone while I'm driving, unlike many people, because I do think it's probably pretty dangerous to do that. But I can get very simple messages that are very useful, and on my watch it's much easier to just kind of glance without having to take my eyes off the road or do anything to sort of retrieve the messages. And so I've actually found that really, really helpful when driving, and I could see where as they and that's just the way the messages are done currently, but you could definitely see where it could be optimized for if you're in a car, display messages in a certain way, and that would be even more helpful. And I could see
or add some intelligence.
Sure.
That, sort of like you were saying with your email, it's like, okay, if I'm going somewhere and I get a text that says, hey, I'm running late, or
the location has changed.
Yeah. Have some intelligence that says, okay, this is a message you actually need to know, as opposed to, Dennis forwarding another chainmail or something.
Yeah, stop those chainmails.
Those are old school, Carlos. So.
I was struggling for an example there.
It's bad luck not to forward.
Though I will say that
still waiting on that fortune that Bill Gates promised me.
That's right. Just how to forward on the message. But I will say that one thing I haven't found useful at all is like directions on the watch, and like right now, if I do, if I'm using maps and navigation. And it'll go to the watch, and that's completely useless to me.
The only time I've found that useful is if I'm moving through a place where I don't want to take my phone out.
Yeah, I can see that. But then you're still staring at your watch.
But then at the same time, I'm not sure. I think that's just something that makes me feel safer rather than actually making me safer.
Potentially. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I still do wonder if as people start thinking through. I mean, again, it goes back to the same, the last podcast that we did last week about VR, where as developers are now developing for the watch, like we'll start to see the new apps and opportunities that are that are really fit for that form factor.
And I think the environment that developers have to play in is changing too.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, compare the software environment for developers from when the iPhone first launched.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And web apps were the be all and end all, and why would you need anything else, to what you have today. And smartwatches are going to be the same. The platform's going to evolve from more, to where some of the early ones that I used, and all you really could do were send notifications.
Right.
And getting access to more of these sensors, and I think for me though, the key is not necessarily just building that standalone functionality, but how it integrates with your phone, which essentially is how it integrates with all of your other services and your digital life.
Right.
And so I think, as opposed to what Mike says, I think getting the integration right is really what it's going to take to really set things off, and it'll get there.
Yeah. No, I think so as well. I think we're basically out of time on this one. Do you guys have any last thoughts, or was that your last thought?
Did you say we're out of time?
Oh gosh.
According to my watch, it's 2 more minutes. So
Well, the battery on mine's dead, so I don't know.
And on that note, thank you, Carlo and Dennis, once again for joining us for a fun and interesting discussion. And thank you to everyone who has been listening. And we will be back next week with another podcast on some other subject. All right, thanks. Bye.
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 The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.